From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the White House presidential transition. Joining us via Zoom to talk more about it is Randy Atkins. Dr. Atkins is a professor of political science and associate dean for the College of Arts and Sciences at UNO. Welcome, Dr. Atkins.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
You bet. Let's begin with a brief history lesson, starting with a change in when the presidential inauguration happens.
Yeah, so in 1933, the Congress decided to change the timing of the inauguration, and they had to do that through the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. And the purpose of it was to shorten the lame duck period, where the previous president and the previous Congress would be in place for a really long period of time, and to shorten it up because the country at the time was moving from an agrarian culture to an industrial culture to a commercial economy, and it was very important to speed things up in that process. It would have been very important in 1933 when President Roosevelt was president or became president. Because of the Great Depression. Unfortunately, it didn't take effect until 1937.
Okay, and while that gap has been closed, there's still kind of a chunk of time between Election Day and Inauguration Day. Why is that?
Yeah, to answer that question, we'd really have to probably dig into the historical record of the 72nd Congress. But what I suspect is they recognize the need to certify election results and to cast and count electoral votes. I also suspect they felt there would be at least some period of time that is needed for a presidential transition. And if you think about the fact that you're really only dealing with, at the most the month of November, December, and a little bit of January, that is really a pretty quick presidential transition. So I think they expected that was probably about as quick as they could do it.
Okay, and for us, of course, in the days and weeks that followed, we witnessed President Trump's denial to concede. Let's take a look.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. The campaign, which I won, by the way, but, we'll find that out, almost 74 million votes.
The mail-in voting scam is the latest part of their 4-year effort to overturn the results of the 2016 election.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
We will stop the steal. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
Randy, given all of that, the challenges that this Biden transition team had, talk about those.
Yeah, I think they were manyfold, and I'll just mention really two or three things here. First of all, the election outcome was still in doubt for a number of days as the votes were counted, then they were recounted, then they were audited, then they were certified. So that's probably the first thing we have to keep in mind. The second thing I think is that the General Services Administrator, Emily Murphy, declined to give the Biden transition team access to federal funding that is provided for specifically for the transition. And it was a number of days, weeks before they got access to that funding. But probably the biggest problem was that there were officials in the Trump administration who were either slow to start meeting with the Biden transition team, or in some cases, once they started meeting, they were just generally unresponsive. And we've been hearing news reports and stories about this. There were probably many other issues, but those are really the three biggest that come to mind.
Okay, and we wondered what Trump's behavior would lead to, and sadly, on Wednesday, January 6th, the country found out. Take a look.
Our country has been under siege for a long time. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building.
Yes, the Trump campaign failed to overturn the election results through a number of recounts in a number of different states. Then they failed to overturn the election results in the courts. And so on January 6th, they planned a rally, which was the same day that the electoral votes were to be counted. There were a number of speakers at that rally, and they encouraged the crowd to march on the Capitol. And that march, as you can see, turned into a riot, where the crowd broke into the Capitol in an effort to stop the counting of the electoral votes. This is very unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this in the United States. And it's clear that a good number of individuals who were participating in this riot, in some people would call domestic terrorism, intended to either take lawmakers hostage or even do them harm. And, like I said, this is something that is unprecedented in American history. We have never seen anything like this. It's beyond words. It's very difficult to explain to people. It's going to have, I think, in part, maybe some lasting damage. But the great thing about it is that the government will respond, and the people have responded. And so I expect that we will come out of this stronger. It's certainly something that we never expected, but it's certainly something that our country can rise to. We can rise to the challenge.
Talk, Randy, about the immediate reaction from the congressional leaders to this act of insurrection.
Yeah, well, the first thing they did was they retreated to safety until the Capitol was secured. And I have to give a lot of credit to the Capitol Police there, even though the building was basically invaded. There were no members of Congress, Democrat or Republican, that were harmed. The congressional leaders, after the Capitol was secured that night, they came back intent on doing the business of the Congress. And that business for the day was counting the Electoral College votes. This was obviously supported by the Democrats, particularly Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer from the Senate. But also it was bipartisan in the sense that Vice President Pence was there. He made a very strong statement. Majority Leader McConnell made a very strong statement supporting completing the business of declaring Joe Biden the Electoral College winner. And, in spite of the resistance of a number of members of the House and Senate, particularly the House, and then Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri in the Senate, who objected to the Electoral College vote of Pennsylvania, eventually at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, Joe Biden was finally declared the winner of the Electoral College.
Okay. All of that led the House of Representatives to vote for a second impeachment. And while the first time in history, some would say there were only a few weeks left to go. So why bother with all of that? How would you respond?
Well, I think there's a few reasons for this. First of all, you have to keep in mind that a number of members of Congress are just mad. I mean, they are just downright upset. And, they were threatened with physical harm. There is no precedent for this. So that is a good part of what's going on here. Second, the attack on the Capitol was at the most encouraged by the chief executive, and at the least not discouraged by the chief executive. depending on how you interpret it. This is at most sedition or treason, and at the very least, a violation of the principle of separation of powers. It is incumbent upon Congress, the members of Congress, to protect the institution of Congress. And so they cannot allow a precedent like this to stand, even though it happened at the end of President Trump's term in office. And then I think there's sort of a third reason I think a number of members of Congress would like to prevent President Trump from possibly running again in 2024. And so, so I think they have, especially the Democrats, but I think others as well, have some reason to want to impeach President Trump and possibly convict him in the Senate.
Okay. In the meantime, American democracy does prevail, as on January 20th, President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris are sworn in. A ceremony that really focused a lot on unity and healing.
And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division.
So much reaction from Amanda Gorman's time at the podium. Randy, I want to ask you, first of all, what were you thinking as she was speaking?
Well, clearly she stole the show at the inauguration. I don't think there's any other way to put that. Presidents are often called to act on as called upon to act as a healer in chief. After the assassination of Kennedy, LBJ served that role. Ford after Watergate, Reagan after the Challenger disaster, Bush after 9/11, and here we see Joe Biden doing some of that. And it's common for presidents to ask for unity and healing in their inaugural address. But Biden's speech was uncommon in the sense that it was all about unity and healing. That was the theme of the speech. That was the theme of the inauguration. And Amanda Gorman's poetry was like a bookend to Biden's speech. It was a great contrast. Here he's a 78-year-old president. She's a 22-year-old Harvard graduate. He's male, she's female, he's white, she's black. He's a politician, she's a poet. But the message was the same. And that's one of the things that I think is very important to take out of this is, she was for the younger generation providing the same message, maybe with different words and with different cadence than and probably more eloquently than President Biden.
Anything else that you want to say, Randy, about Inauguration Day before we go on in this interview, just in terms of your overall impressions?
I think the thing to keep in mind about this is, this was a unique inauguration in that President Trump wasn't there. He wasn't part of it. It didn't feel like there was a transfer of power like we have traditionally seen from Bush to Clinton or Clinton to Bush or Bush to Obama or even Obama to Trump. But there still is a transition of power. We still have democratic government. The people's will became enacted that day, just like the people's will a couple weeks earlier was enacted when Congress was sworn in. So I think it's very important to remember that. This is an election. We have had unbroken, regular, frequent, fair elections for over 200 years, and hopefully we'll continue to do that for a long time.
Okay. Of course, at the top of Biden's agenda list, whatever you want to call it, is of COVID-19. They have, in fact, put together a 7-step process, for lack of a better term. As we're looking at this, can you talk about the real differences between Biden and Trump on
Well,
COVID?
first of all, there's a 7-point plan. which I don't think during the Trump administration we felt like there was a 7-point plan. We felt like there was a plan of action. And if there was at the outset, it was lost somewhere over time. And then, there's some very important things in there that the Trump administration has not focused on. For example, promoting additional testing, wearing masks for 100 days. Sort of whether you want to or not, we're all going to be in it together and do it for each other. Biden is willing to utilize the Defense Production Act, whether that's to manufacture vaccines or syringes or more personal protective gear. And then finally, there's a reestablishment of the White House Office of Global Health Security, which was first established in the Obama administration and then sort of, let go under the Trump administration. There's a lot that is packaged in those points, but I think that it's just a different paradigm that they're operating under, just a different worldview, and this 7-point plan really brings that out.
Okay, what other issues do you think that we're going to be seeing here, Randy, especially in these first 100 days, and why?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's going to be COVID. That is issue number one. That is, in fact, why Joe Biden is probably president today, because of the pandemic. So that's going to be the first thing, I think. That's going to be at the forefront of everything. The second thing is going to be the stimulus bill, which is obviously related to that. The economy, we want to get it moving again and get people who've been laid off back to work, and businesses that have had to close back open. Schools back open, things like that. But I also know that, right now, President Biden is trying to staff up in the White House. He's trying to get his cabinet approved by the Senate. And then there's been a whole host of executive orders that he's already signed, including rejoining the Paris Treaty, rejoining the World Health Organization, reversing restrictions for U.S. entry for passport holders from Muslim-majority countries, stopping the border wall construction. And I expect to see that there's going to be a number of other executive orders, particularly related to the pandemic. And then also, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see additional legislative measures appear here. But again, it's all going to get back to COVID.
Okay. I want to spend some time talking about Joe Biden for a minute. The youngest U.S. senator to be elected, the oldest U.S. president. I mean, that's pretty impressive. He's got a lot of experience behind him. But Randy, you've been following all of this, and this is your area of expertise. What's your take on President Joe Biden?
Yeah, well, there's probably no president from 1 to 45 who had a better resume than Joe Biden has. Now, that's resume experience. That's 36 years in the Senate. That's a long-term chair of both the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committees. 8 years as vice president under Barack Obama. There's literally nobody who probably has a better resume than Joe Biden. And so Joe Biden has the kind of experience that you're looking for to be president. But as we all know, experience doesn't always translate over to leadership. And so what we need to see Joe Biden do in the next 100 days or in the next year is lead the people, lead the Congress, and he's going to have to lead the world too, because the world does look to the United States. But he has the kind of experience that would suggest that he will be very good at those things.
Okay, and Kamala Harris then plays into this how?
Well, I think she's going to be, how do I say this? She's going to be a partner for Joe Biden. The modern vice president, dating back to the days of, say, Walter Mondale with being vice president for Jimmy Carter, the modern vice president has been a full partner in terms of politics and policy. And that was the case for, whether we're talking about, George H.W. Bush to Ronald Reagan, or Al Gore to Bill Clinton, or Joe Biden to Barack Obama. And because of that, I think that Kamala Harris is going to play that kind of same role. I think she's going to benefit tremendously from that. And we're going to see somebody who's got a good resume. She was Attorney General of the largest state in the country. She's been in the Senate for a few years. She's very smart, but I think that experience of working directly with Biden is going to make her a very good vice president.
Let's talk for a minute about our international relationships, Randy. When you talk about those first 100 days, you talk about Joe Biden and all of his experience, and just referencing Kamala Harris too in terms of her role in all of this. Where will they start when we talk about healing, right? When we talk about all of those things that he mentioned on Inauguration Day and prior. How do they even begin when it comes to addressing the world, the international piece of it?
Well, I think there's a couple things to think about. I mean, number one, we've already begun to rejoin some of the international treaties and organizations that we withdrew from in the Trump administration. Some others will be more difficult. And so I think it's going to take time. But the first thing he had to do was to get his defense secretary, his secretary of state approved in the Senate, and both of them are now approved. So he's got to get his leadership team together, and that's gonna be step one. He's already, I'm sure, been in touch with world leaders. Not that he was not, even as just Joe Biden, private citizen. But he's going to be in touch with world leaders. They're going to want to be in touch with him. I think a lot of people in the world are looking to the United States for leadership, particularly on the pandemic, particularly on other issues that may be related to trade or conflict. And so, I suspect that, given his experience, given his time, having worked on the Hill and worked in the executive branch, that world leaders are going to be looking to him. And it's fully expected for a president of the United States. Okay,
let's change gears for a minute and go back to Donald Trump. Kind of a loaded question here, but what's next for him?
Well, I imagine a little bit of golf is probably next for him. But I think we all know that there's an impeachment process that's coming in the Senate. He's already been impeached in the House, and in the Senate, it's going to require a hearing. He's got a number of other legal troubles. But at the same time, I don't think Donald Trump's going to go away. I think he has made a name for himself in U.S. politics. I think he considers himself a force in U.S. politics. He clearly has a following in U.S. politics. And so I fully expect to see him very involved politically. But I expect, right now he's got some legal issues to deal with. He's going to play a little golf. And I expect to probably see him reappear or reemerge in politics probably in the summer or the fall.
Okay. And I guess I'm curious, when you take a look back at what has transpired with him, what do you think of his base, his support base? Is it about the same? I guess I'm curious as to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it's not just about Trump's base. It's about the future of the Republican Party. And we're going to find that out in the next couple of years. Is this going to be the party of Donald Trump? Because there are some Republicans who still see it as the party of Donald Trump. Or there are other Republicans who are looking for a new direction. Is that going to cause the party to split in two? Because we're hearing some discussion of that right now. Or will the party unify around a new standard bearer? And it may take until 2024 for that to happen. I just think we don't know. I think we're in a tough spot. A party is in a tough spot anytime they lose a presidential election, and they go through a period of time where they have to sort of reinvent themselves. And we'll see if the Republican Party does that. But President Trump has a pretty firm grip on the mechanism of the Republican Party right now, even as an outgoing president.
Okay, given everything that's transpired, especially over the last few months, where does America in general go from here, Randy?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a quote by Bono, who's the lead singer of the Irish rock band U2. He said, "America is not a country, it's an idea. It's a dream that belongs to the whole world." And one of the things I think that we have to think about, which is what Amanda Gorman was talking about, is it's incumbent upon us to share that dream with other people. to let other people be part of it, whether that is in their home country, thinking about how their home country can become, a democratic system, or whether those people immigrate to the United States. Think about why have all these families in their 200 plus years immigrated to the United States? What was that dream of America? And, we've had national tragedies before. Certainly the 400 plus thousand people who've died over the last year because of COVID, certainly that constitutes as a national tragedy. And I think that it's possible that the country may rally around the flag here. They may come together as a nation. And I hope that we do that. But one of the things I just want to mention is that if we don't do it, it's going to be okay. Sometimes democracy is a little bit messy. And that idea of America isn't necessarily going to go away because things are a little messy sometimes. It's still an aspiration. It's still something that we reach and strive for. And so I hope Americans will see it that way.
We have about 2 minutes left in this interview. Randy, if we were in your class right now, how would you tie up this particular interview? Again, if it were a class, what would you tell your students at the very end of this?
Well, I always think it's important to ask my students what they think, as opposed to necessarily me telling them. And so one of the questions I asked them today was, well, what grade would you give Joe Biden in his first week in office? And, we got a handful of A's, we got a rather large number of B's, and we got a few C's too. And one of the things that I noticed from it, or from their discussing that, as we went into that conversation, was that they were looking at this from many different perspectives, whether they were looking at it from being a liberal or a conservative, a Democrat or a Republican, a male or a female, being black or white or Latino, or whether they were looking at it from being a younger student who's maybe 19 or 20 years old, or some of my students who are older, who are probably closer to my age. Some of them have served in the military. And so I think people are going to continue to look at politics differently. And it's okay, because that's what makes us great. That's what makes us America. But in the end, we only get to have one president. And in 4 years, we get to decide whether we want to keep him or not.
Randy Adkins, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. I want to thank our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course, all of you for watching. As we close, a look at scenes from the OPPD Arboretum as seen through the lens of Philip Pierce, a senior at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
The Bob Carey Pedestrian Bridge is a great attraction for any resident of Omaha to come walk, jog, or take in the great views from the Missouri River to the city of Omaha itself. Take the opportunity to be in two states at once, as you can put yourself at the state divide line between Nebraska and Iowa. The bridge itself is 3,000 feet long, so it'll be sure to give you a fun-filled exercise day.
Coming up in 5, 4,
3, 2, 1, faded brass to a full.